All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. Today's presentation is to provide you with an overview of the new streamlined temporary layoff variance process, and we're joined by the Ministry of Labour, Deneen Leduc, Assistant Deputy Minister, Bill Boyd, Executive Director of Employment Standards Branch, and their team, Rebecca Johnston and Kaylin Shirk, Director of Project Management. Our presenters will discuss what's new and how it works, and then they'll walk us through the new online tools and resources and save time for a question-answer period at the end. For those of you who sent us in your questions beforehand, we've passed those along, and they will answer them as part of the presentation and also at the end if time remains. I'll now turn it over to Deneen.
Great, thank you so much, Terry. And I'm in Victoria today, so very grateful to be leading this call from the traditional territories of the Esquimalt, Songhees, and Lekwungen speaking people. So thank you, Kaylin. I think I'm ready to move to the next slide. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. You know, some really unprecedented times have driven us to where we are right now. There was the global pandemic in March. And as a result of that, businesses were forced really to lay off temporarily their staff as a result of the pandemic. And so the provisions of the Employment Standards Act begin to apply once there's been a layoff for a certain period of time. So under the Act, if someone has been laid off for 13 weeks out of 20, the layoff is deemed to be a termination. And that can give rise to the obligation to pay compensation for length of service, or severance, as it's more colloquially known. So government responded with regulatory orders in council to extend this time period on sort of a global basis. They passed a COVID-19 emergency layoff period, extended the first 13 weeks under the statute to 16, and then again at the end of June there was another extension out to 24 weeks out of 28, which means all of those will expire on August the 30th. So if you have staff that are currently on a temporary layoff and you won't be able to recall them before August 30th, or you don't want to, non-unionized employers must apply for a variance under the Employment Standards Act if you want to keep that connection to your employees beyond August the 30th. For unionized workplaces, it's a different structure. Many of them will have in their collective agreement provisions something like layoff and recall, and they use the collective bargaining process for changes to that agreement. Next slide. So, you know, economic restart is underway, and there have been lots of promising indicators that businesses have been able to reopen and recall their staff and safely operate. But there are still many businesses, as we know, that have staff still off on temporary layoff and have not been able to recall them. And so, you know, without a variance, that really valuable employer-employee relationship is severed if a variance isn't sought or the people aren't recalled before August the 30th. And there's a real advantage to economic restart. I mean, employers have already invested in those employees. They understand your business. They can help you restart quickly. And so we want to maintain that connection. And there's a real value for employees as well. Being connected to their employer often includes additional workplace benefits, as well as their ability to apply for some of the federal benefits like CERB. So it's really important that we maintain that employer-employee relationship if possible. And so the variance application process is a tool that will help you do that if you're still going to have staff on temporary layoff beyond August the 30th. Now, you know, one of the additional advantages for employers is maintaining that connection. And there is an obligation, if that connection is severed, for some eligible employees to be entitled to compensation for length of service. And you know, when businesses are restarting, that could be an additional challenge to restart and reopening more fully. So we want to make it really clear that this tool is available and it's very flexible. And we're going to walk you through today what we've built to make the tool as easy as possible, what it looks like, how you access it, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the issues that have been raised in some of the questions. Okay, next slide. So what we've built is a very streamlined two-step process for employers. The first step is you have to survey your workforce that are impacted. So you only have to survey the people that are currently on temporary layoff or expected to continue to be on temporary layoff past August. And so in order to do this survey, we prepared a template that's available on our website, and we'll show it to you today, where there's just a few fields where an employer can customize, and then they can send that communication out to their staff. And within the communication are all of the required elements that we would expect for a positive and supported application to be accepted by Employment Standards Branch. So there's no guesswork on your end. The materials in the template for your use and for your employees to receive. And there's also an embedded link within that template, and we'll show it to you, where your employees can go and get information directly from Employment Standards Branch, and there's a tool unique to them. And that allows them to actually provide you, the employer, with informed consent, that they understand what the variance is, they understand what you're asking them to do and what it means for them, and then they can just click on a button, create a PDF, and email that to you. So you'll actually have documented support of your employees for the variance. Now, you need to have the support of more than 50%, so the statute talks about a majority of employees who are affected by the variance. And one of the questions that we received from this group is, well, what does that really mean? So you can apply for a variance for all employees if you have all of your employees still on temporary layoff and you're not open at all. But if you have likely, like many, recall some, then you're going to have a pool of employees who are still on temporary layoff. And they might be identifiable by their job description, so you can seek a variance by job duty or classification. And you can also seek a variance for just individual named employees. If you have a very small workforce and some support it and some don't, there is the ability to just name individual variants. So that's one of the questions I know was of interest to this group. So the first step is survey the workforce. And so this is a step that takes a little bit of time, and it's why we're really encouraging employers to start this process as quickly as possible, because it's the summer and it can be difficult to reach people. And even though they have a real interest in hearing from you, the employer, that can take a little bit of time for them to go and understand it and provide you with a response. So that's the first step. The second step is complete an online application form. So once you have all of the responses from the employee for variance, they'll send you a documentation to support it. And then you complete a very short online application. It takes about 15 minutes. It allows you to identify, it asks you things like, who is the employer, who is the contact person, what locations are you seeking this variance for, and they ask you a little bit more about your reasons for the variance. So you have to submit your application by August the 25th if you want to get an answer, a decision from the Employment Standards Branch before the temporary layoff period expires on August the 3rd. So we are really encouraging you to come through the door as early as possible, and we'll talk a little bit more about the supports we have in place to help you do that process. Next slide. So for some of you, you may have staff that are hired on a fixed, definite term basis. So they have a fixed start date and a fixed end date. And there is an exception to the obligation to pay compensation for service if you have a definite term employee. So if you think this is part of you and it involves your workforce, we'll encourage you to contact the Employment Standards Branch for more details specific to your circumstance. But here's at a high level, it does require a clear new period of employment each season. You can't just roll people over year after year. And the employer really works, the employee works a definite term or completes a specific kind of work within 12 months. So if you think that seasonal work applies to you, please don't hesitate to reach out to the Employment Standards Branch and they can give you more particularized advice for your circumstance. Next slide. So what the variance process really means for you is it gives you a tool to keep your employees connected to you, and it can extend the date out. Government has extended the date for temporary layoff by weeks. This tool is a little more flexible and will give you the opportunity to, with your employees, identify a date, that could be months out. It's really business-driven, what your business need is. For businesses that are fully closed right now, they may need a longer, they may request a longer period from the Director of Employment Standards. For those who are already partially operating or nearly full and have just not recalled a particular job category, for example, like maybe the restaurant's operational but the pub isn't, then this is again a very flexible tool for you to pick a date. One of the questions that we've heard quite often from employers and certainly from people on this call is, what date do I pick? And so our advice to you is you need to pick a reasonable date that you think you may be able to recall your staff. The Director of Employment Standards on the web content has signaled that if you're looking to extend the temporary layoff period beyond December 31st, that will require some additional information. That would be exceptional in the current circumstances. We know there's a lot of uncertainty, so it's really dependent upon your business. And there was an opportunity in the form to provide more information if you're looking for a longer extension period. This tool really supports economic restart. We want businesses to rebound from COVID-19. We know it's challenging for both workers and employers to rebound after this pandemic. And so, even if you're not sure if you need a temporary extension, we would like you to think about going through the process because it does take a little bit of time. There's no cost to do it. And if you're able to recall your employees who are currently on temporary layoff by August 30th, fantastic, and you don't need the variance, no problem. But if you're not sure, please go through this process because we don't want people to have those really important employer-employee relationships severed by operation of the statute just because a timeline was missed in terms of this process. So really encouraging businesses to come through the door with the variance process. This pandemic has really challenged people right across the economy to work together, and variance applications are no different. They're joint. Even though the employer is filling it out, you do require support of the majority of your employees that are impacted. And while the employer chooses the recall date, they need to communicate that to their employees so the employees understand when they might reasonably be recalled. And that date is an important piece in the form, and we'll show you where. In the email that you send out to your staff to survey them, that date needs to be reflected in the final form so that the Employment Standards Branch understands that employees knew when they were likely going to be recalled, and that would support a positive outcome on the variance. Next slide. So, this is support for local government. It's actually support for everybody, including the entire hotel industry. We realize that online tools and supports might not be ideal for everyone, but we've certainly heard from some hotel employers that some of their staff are not really comfortable, tech savvy, and they have a very in-person or paper-based relationship. So we wanted to make sure we had a support in place to enable those relationships to stay connected as easily as possible. So there's in-person support available at all of the service offices across British Columbia, as well as Employment Standards Branch offices. And so they can help people fill in the forms, they can help the employees navigate their support form, they can help employers, especially smaller businesses, upload documents, fill in the form, whatever they need, in-person support available, and will be prioritized. Multilingual support. So we've also heard that there are a lot of multilingual employees in the workforces today, and we really support that. We want to make sure people understand what we're offering. So there's multilingual support available, live simultaneous translation free, that can help people understand both the form and have the form translated into more than 140 languages, as well as just answer questions that they have, and they can even be transferred into Employment Standards Branch with their translator to get that really specific kind of advice that can be so helpful to employers while they're going through the process. So pretty broad hours. It is Monday to Friday, 7:30 to 5, and we really encourage people to use that line. There's a specialized line for just for variance applications, so we've done everything we can to make this as quick and easy for you because we know it's one more thing that you have to do, but it's an important thing, and it will really help you and your employees stay connected during a challenging time. And yeah, just a reminder that this is a joint application. So your workforce is a really important part of this equation, and we've set up the two-step process to be as easy and supportive for both workers and employers as possible. But it's the employer that needs to initiate the process. You need to survey your employees and give a sense of what that recall date is going to be. And you have to upload the materials and fill in the final form. So it's joint, but a lot of, there's some obligations for the employees to provide you with good informed consent and for the employer to fill in the form. Okay, next slide. So online tools and resources. So the COVID layoff site is the main landing page for this process, and we're going to walk you through that. We're also going to show you the variance application form. And if at any time you have questions, please don't hesitate to call the 1-800 line, which gets you right to Employment Standards Branch, or you can email questions to that variance@gov.bc.ca website. All right, so with this, I'm going to turn it over to Kaylin Shirk, our Director of Project Management, to walk you through the online forms, and then there will be an opportunity for questions. Thank you, Kaylin.
All right, thank you, everyone. I'm just going to switch over from the presentation to the website for the temporary layoffs. Can everyone see the website now? Perfect, great. So as Denise mentioned, we've built in some supports around what custom information tailored to the situation that everyone is in around the temporary layoff variance application. When you arrive at the website, much of the content is just what Denine's been going over around what is the variance for, how does it apply. The content is then streamed into two directions, one for the workers and one for employers. So we'll go through the employer content first, and if there's time, we can look at briefly the workers side as well. Clicking into the web page here, you get taken to the application page. First, parts of the page are around whether or not you qualify. So that's similar to what Denine was going over at the beginning of the presentation around non-unionized environments and an overview of what has happened, what's gotten us to now, and reasons and benefits to going through that variance process. Once you get through the first pieces, you get down to the application steps. As Denine mentioned, the first step is to inform your employees of your intention to apply. In order to help with that, we've created a sample email, and that email is filled with all the content that workers may have questions about, or any additional information they may need to help give them that informed, or to give them the information they need to be able to provide you with informed consent for your application process. So you can use that. I'll pop into that quickly after we've finished the website here. Once they receive that email, they can use our online support tool. We've got a link to it here. We've also got a link to it in the email template, as well as a link to it on that worker page. So there's lots of ways for workers to get in to give their support using that online tool, as well as a paper or a PDF version that you can either print and have a paper version available for your staff, or send it out to them if they're more comfortable using a PDF instead of a web form. Once you have received all of your feedback from your employees and you get to that majority 50 plus consent, or 50+% in agreement with the application, you can go in and submit your online application. In order to help you track that, if you're looking at dealing with a large number of employees, or if you have a named specific list, we have a template as well for you to download to track your employees and whether you've informed them with the email, as well as whether or not they have sent in their consent to the application as well. Once you're ready to apply and have all those consents received back, we can click here and go into the application from there. The last two pieces of information on the site are just around what happens after you do apply. So after you apply, you'll receive notice from the Employment Standards Branch, and if the variance is granted, you'll get a copy of that, and if it's denied, you'll get the information around that as well. And then we recommend that you inform your employees of what the outcome of that application was, because it was a joint application with them and ultimately will affect them. If you do prefer, we do have an option that you can download a PDF application for the variance application and submit that by email to us if that's something that you're more comfortable with. And again, that contact information that Denine was just looking at in the last slide, we have it here as well, so you can contact us by email. That 1-800 line is for both any regular questions you have, as well as that translation service is available there. So just jumping over to, I'll show you the template first before we get into the application. So this is a copy of the Word document template that we have prepared that holds all the information around the variance application. So helps, again, enable your employees to give that informed consent and help with your application for variance to employment standards. We've highlighted the sections that we would expect you to be able to customize around general information of around the recall date. And again, we want to make sure that that recall date that we're communicating out to the employees will match what the application is, so that we know that the employees are agreeing to the same thing that you're applying for. The template has the same content in it as that workers page that I mentioned at the start. So all of this content is also available on the website if employees are choosing to get it from there instead. And this just allows you to customize any additional content that you see would fit your particular work circumstances. Once you get through, we have a note here around, this is the link out. We have, to give your support, you can use this online form. Clicking on the link from the email template here takes you back to that workers form as well, and allows your workers to give their consent that way. Again, we highlight and kind of make sure that everyone's aware of what the recall date is, so that we know that everyone's in agreement with what the application is about. The employees have the same opportunity to access those channels for support and information as we're on the website. So we've got that web link out to the page, as well as the 1-800 number for support if they need to. Jumping back to the website, if I clicked here, once I've got all my support back and received all of my consent from my employees, I'm going to click here into the apply section, which is going to pop up. Oh, sorry. Switch screens again. It's going to pop up the application page here. So as Deneen mentioned, it's a quick form, 15 minutes to complete. We do need you to have an email address that we can look at corresponding with you after as a result of your application, and there's no cost to complete it. We recommend that you use that template that we referenced to track your employees, but it's not required if you've just got a small number of employees or you have another way to track them. So I'm going to go through the form just quickly here so you can see what the pages look like. We have a few consents around accurate information. We ask for whether you're using a public or private to help us with the technology in the background time out faster if it's on a public, so nothing gets left behind. Right now, the only piece of the Employment Standards Act that you can request a variance to is temporary layoff through this form. So that's what there's just one selection there. We ask you if you're registered or not. If you are registered, we use some lookup in the background to help us find the business right in the registry so that you don't have to look that information up. And for the purpose, I'm just going to put corporation here. Once you're into the application form, you'll notice there's 4 sections here. There may be a fifth section if you have a partnership scenario and we need to ask a little bit more about the partnership, or a situation with directors. Well, there'll be a little bit more contact here, but they're generally all the same. Once you get in, we ask you for the legal name of the employer. I'm just going to use a test, and I can pick, again, this helps me look up my business automatically from the BC registry and pulls back that registry number, so I don't have to have it on hand. Just filling some of this information out quickly. This should be pretty straightforward information for you to have on hand if you know about the business. You can choose whether it's a mobile number or not, and that just helps us know how to contact. Website address, again, is optional. Whether or not the business is subject to an insolvency proceeding, if you ask yes, we ask for some more details. If you ask no, no details are required. We try and help as much as we can with the mailing address, expecting you to be a BC business, so we have pre-populated that for you, as well as provided a lookup using the BC geocoder for addresses within the province. Once you have finished a section, you get a check mark that it's done and can move on to the next section. We ask for a contact person specifically for the application so that we know who to contact with regards to any questions or comments that we have during the application process, and we just need their email again to help us communicate, and phone number as well. Given that a lot of these people are going to be working within the business itself, we give you the choice to select that address that we've already provided as part of the business address, or you can use a different address if that's more appropriate to your circumstances. I'm going to use just the same address, and that completes the contact section. For work locations, we understand that there may be multiple locations for a single operation, so we've enabled you to be able to add in different addresses throughout the section here so that you can have multiple locations. So I added one location, I'm able to add another location. I can edit or remove that application as need be. Finally, the fourth additional information section is where we ask you the most questions about the variance application itself. In order to process the variance, we have a question around whether or not that the variance application helps preserve the employer's operations. So answering that question, the next question asks why the variance is required. Knowing the current circumstances, we expect a lot of the applications to fall into either a phase 4 type opening or a phase 3 but not fully operational type opening. So we've pre-templated those two responses, but we're also giving another reason if that's applicable to you. If you do choose other, we ask you for a little bit more content around that for our information. I'm just going to select phase 3. And again, as referenced in that email template and as Deneen mentioned as well, we ask you for that recall date. So this is something that we'll be checking to make sure that matches between the employee's consent and your proposed recall date so that everyone's expecting the same date and it all matches. So I'm going to put October 31st. How many employees are affected by this application? So as Deneen mentioned, you may be applying for the variance for all of your employees that are currently on temporary layoff or some portion of those. This is for each variance application, you put how many are affected for that particular application. So in this case, I'm just going to say that there's 50. And then if you've been tracking your consents that you're going to be uploading, you'll be able to enter it here. So how many employees consent to this application? I'm going to say 40. And as mentioned, you can either apply for all employees, employees with a specific job title or duties, or specific named employees. If you ask for employees with a specific job title, we ask for those details, or if all employees is just all employees. Here is where you can upload those consent forms. So once your employees have sent you back the PDF consent forms from the online tool or from the PDF form, then you can save those either as one single document on your computer and upload one single document, or just drag and drop them individually into this particular uploads area. We do have a restriction in the maximum number of documents uploaded as being 500. So if you are doing a very, very large variance application, it would be best to batch those together so that you don't hit that 500 document limit, but otherwise you can just drop them one at a time. So I'm just going to take my document and drop it in here, and it'll show me upload successful, and I can click done. Once I've uploaded it, you'll see that I have a check mark here that it's successfully been uploaded. I can choose to remove it if I've uploaded an incorrect file, and then I can continue to upload files as needed. This is an optional item as well, so if you have been tracking your employee list of who has consented, you have the opportunity to upload this as well. That can help with reconciling against the template or reconciling against the consent forms that we have received, but it's just an option for you there. The last question here is around which category which industry that your affected employees work in, and you can select from the list. We pull this out of the NAICS code list, so it should be, everyone should be covered in this particular listing. I'm going to select accommodation and food services in this case and hit save and continue. So now I've got all my 4 sections complete, so I can click on the review and submit button that comes up for me now, and it takes me through a summary of all of the information that I've completed. So I have my employer information and I can verify that that's correct. My contact person, verify that's correct. Any operating locations, as well as all of those answers to that additional information section that I've applied. And then we have some certification statements at the end here around the content of your application and how it meets with the Employment Standards Act. Once you've clicked through all of your certifications, you'll see that the submit button comes up here and I can click submit. Upon submission, I will be taken to a confirmation page with my application number and submission date, but I'll also receive an email at the same time, which in my inbox just dinged, that has a copy of all of the information that I submitted, as well as the application number and the submission date. So I can keep that on file in case I have any questions or need to reference it for any particular reason. Okay. So seeing we have a little bit extra time, I'm just going to jump back briefly to the workers page to show you what that particular section looks like. So back to the main landing page, we have a section here on workers. So clicking into the workers page will bring you up with a website which is fairly overlapped with the content that goes out in that email template. So do you qualify? Again, the same sort of overview around what the temporary layoff period is and why a variance is required, information around what a variance is, the benefits, and how does the application process work. This is all the same content that is in that template, as well as similar to what's on the employer side. And once an employee has had a chance to read through that content, we give them information about the tool. So how to make the best decision for you. When you click on the Give Your Support button, that takes you to the tool that creates that PDF for you, or you can download that PDF as an employee and send it back to your employer. If I click on the Give My Support section, it takes me to a web form that asks me similar information just at the top, going over what you're consenting to, and then make a decision. I can give my support or decline my support. If I decline, no further action is needed. We don't need you to send us a record of anyone who's declined. We only need that support to get to that 50+% support. If I choose to give my consent, I get asked for some information on my employer name, the employee recall date. So again, that's where we'll be checking to see that they match, and that confirmation that I've read the available resources. So that goes to the informed piece of that consent there. Once all of that is complete, the next bit is just around the employee information. So the name, your job title or role, your email, and your phone number. And then once you've completed all that, we have some steps on what to do next, and we have the Save PDF button, which allows you to generate that PDF to send directly to your employer for their use in part of their application. So that's it for the actual tools piece. So Deneen, I can pass that back over to you.
Thanks, Kaylin. So at this stage, there's just a couple more questions that we wanted to answer. One of the questions that sent in was, are there things we need to avoid saying to employees so that we don't appear to be pressuring them? And the short answer is no. This is about open and honest communication. And the employer is going to provide us with an opportunity to identify what date they think is reasonable for recall. And the employee needs to know what that is and understand what their options are. And so that's why there's really there's no magic words here. If you're using the templates, they're designed to make it as easy as possible for employers and employees to jointly do this, this variance process. So with that, I'm going to stop and invite the questions, and I'll ask the Executive Director of Employment Standards, Bill Boyce, to also be ready for questions. And Terry, if you wanted to curate any of the questions, please feel free to let us know, and we'll respond from there.
one of the questions that came through is what happens if we've chosen a date and the date is not the right one? So is there a process to do a renewal? Can I recall early? Can I extend? And there was also a question about, can I do this for, like, do I need the same date for everyone, or can I apply for different groups?
So both great questions. So for the first one, we'll answer the last one first. Can you apply for different groups with different dates? Yes. But in order to do that, you're going to have to do different variance applications if you've got different groups with different dates. And then I'm going to invite Bill to answer maybe the first question.
Yeah, so thanks, Deneen. Can everyone hear me? I'm gonna, you nod, and if you can hear me, that's great. So on the question of uncertainty, we certainly appreciate that we don't know exactly when the pandemic is going to end or when reopenings might be applicable. So what we're suggesting is go ahead with your application, and if further information down the road indicates to you that you might need an extension, it would be a new application. But again, because you've gone through this process once, we think it's going to be a lot more streamlined, and so that you could renew that. And again, we're thinking that very likely, hopefully, that you have maybe recalled some, maybe not all of those people, and so your variance application might shrink to some extent. The 50% group might be a different group, just based on what the circumstances are at that point in time. So the answer is you certainly can extend again if there needs to be another variance, but we are recommending that the sort of outlying date is December 31st, just for the purposes of certainty. But if something happens between now and then that clearly indicates you're not going to be opening until after that date, then we would wait just before the expiry of that variance and ask for another one.
And I just want to jump into all great advice, Bill. One of the questions that had also been provided to us is what about banquets, and where those are a little bit more impacted by the provincial health officer orders. And so when there's areas with a large amount of uncertainty, if you have a business need for a longer, you can certainly ask for that longer duration, but it would be up to the Director of Employment Standards when they get your full application to make that on a case-by-case basis.
There's a couple of questions on the chat that I can see here, Deneen, that I just thought maybe we could quickly jump into. So we've answered the question about the extension. There was another question about few employees within a department and not the entire department. The answer to that question is in the affirmative. Yes, you can. If you need to just recall a certain, or if you just need to have a variance for a certain group of a certain names, for example. So if you've recalled half your staff, but the other half is still on layoff because you don't have enough work for them, then you could just apply for a variance for those specific individuals. So it's really up to you and your workforce to decide what's the most appropriate approach there. There's another question about employees whose layoff began before probationary period ended. Is there no variance required? The answer to that question is really, it's up to you. In cases, most people are thinking about this as a preemptive way to avoid having to pay compensation for length of service, which is colloquially kind of referred to as severance. Of course, if they're a probationary employee, they may not be entitled to severance, so you may not need that for that particular employee. Of course, then you would lose the connection with that employee at that time. So it's really going to be a question of you deciding what relationship you need to maintain or don't need to maintain. But the question, if you're looking to simply avoid compensation for length of service, if they've worked less than 3 months, they're not entitled to it. So and all that information about who's entitled to compensation for length of service is available on our website. And then the last question is about if it's denied, is there appeal process? Is there an application to reapply? The answer is yes. Any decision that we if we issue a decision saying we're not granting your variance, there is an appeal process available. Our hope, though, is that we'll be able to pragmatically work with applicants and try and figure out why we're not granting the variance and try and get you straight in terms of what would be more appropriate, so that we're not going through an appeal to just get to the answer that we all need to get to. So we are hopeful to be very pragmatic in that context. And so obviously, our hope is that if we get an application that we clearly aren't going to issue, we'll be contacting you to talk about where there's some challenges and how we might reframe it in a way that would work more appropriately under the legislation. The last question, I think, the one about the 50% agreed, what happens to those that say no? The variance is enforced for all that are impacted by the variance. So if you get 51% of your employees, then the 49% are also captured under the variance as per the legislation. And so again, they're essentially also extended by virtue of the fact that the majority of their workforce has also agreed to that. I'm just looking at other questions here.
I can answer the question about the verbiage if you'd like.
Thanks. Go ahead, Kaylin.
Sure. So whoever noted it, yes, right now the button just says give your support instead of provide or decline support, with the reasoning being that we don't actually require a copy of anyone who declines their support, and that focus on that button is really just to give your support. But I agree that we can add some additional wording in there to make that clear that there's both options available behind that button.
There's also a question about we currently have employees on CEWS, so may not need to lay off until after August 30th. Will this process be available, and will the response be as timely?
So I can try and answer that question. The variance process is available all the time. It's a creature of our Employment Standards Act in the province, and we'll certainly try to provide timely, responsive service to employers, employees in the province. The question really will be, again, what's the context? So at this point, I would say the process will be there. We're not going to turn this off at the end of August. We'll have the ability to still process variances, and again, we do expect that there'll be some who will need to renew or get new variances because the date that they thought they would be reopening is going to be pushed out for some reason. And so I think the answer is yes, we're hopeful that this process should be available for you as you need it.
Bill, it's Deneen. I see a question in the chat about if you have all of your people recalled now, but you may need to lay them off after August 30th. Can you talk about the timelines under the Employment Standards Act for that?
Yeah, so that would be we would be reverting back to the sort of traditional rules for temporary layoff. So that is again, you can lay them off for a period of up to 13 weeks and 20 weeks without it being a deemed termination under the legislation. So right now, the legislation says you can lay them off up until 24 weeks, which is coincides with that August 30th date for most people who were laid off early in the pandemic. As soon as you get into a new layoff situation post August 30th, you'd be starting that 13-week clock over again, and then be having that same time period. And again, depending on what happens with the pandemic second wave, government may decide to make changes. We certainly will have the variance process available as well. There is some questions here about employees that have been recalled. They're not willing to return to work only for a limited time as long as CERB is available. That's a great question. It's one we've heard a lot actually at the branch. The answer to that question is really that's it's a bit of a precarious one in that typically if you recall an employee and they refuse the recall, that's a deemed abandonment by the employee. And so again, in most cases, that would be how we would treat that circumstance. We would caution people to be a little careful there though, because there may be other reasons why they are declining to come back to work. They may be saying it's because of CERB, but it may be a childcare issue. It may be a health related issue that could get you into human rights or some kind of other issue there. So just without the pat answer is if you recall an employee and they decline the recall, that's an abandonment, and it's deemed that there's no obligation for the employer to carry on with that employment relationship. And I would just caution people to be very careful in this context that may not necessarily be all of the facts, and so you might need to do a little bit more thinking about the particular reasons about why they're declining to come back, and making sure you've got that information somewhere, and perhaps maybe seeking legal advice on that.
There's also a question about what sort of additional information are you looking for if you are wanting to extend the date into 2021?
Thanks. So I can jump on that. So the challenge we have here is the legislation is very specific. It says the director must specify an end date for the variance application. And so we're trying to be as flexible as we can. But as you've probably all been aware, most governments, including ours, have only done fairly short duration extensions, a couple of weeks here, a couple of weeks there. And that's been fairly consistent across the country. And so when we came up with the December 31st date as sort of a target end out date, We thought that that was probably as far as we could reasonably stretch it, given the fact that the wage subsidy also kind of extends that far as well. But if you're in an organization that is prohibited, for example, for being open into 2021 because the public health officer has said your industry cannot be open, you cannot be carrying on your function to this date, then that would certainly be the type of information that we would try and consider and factor into a decision on that.
So Terry, are you seeing other questions that you'd like us to respond to?
Yeah, there's one that says, are applications to December 31st the only ones that you'll approve? The position of convention, catering, wedding workers will clearly not be required until phase 4. So we want to set a layoff date as much as a year from now. Is that something that would be considered? Or under what, like, what would they need to provide?
So again, we have to, as by operation of the ESA, the branch has to consider every application we receive. But the other side of that is we have to be sure that there's a benefit to the employees. And so, again, I think the question on that case would be, I think the appropriate apply for what you think you need, but understand that as the branch is required to kind of assess that in the context of what's happening here, which is essentially depriving the employees of their ability to request compensation for their length of service at the end of a termination. And so again, we would suggest that probably the more appropriate process is to do the temporary interim variance and see where things go. And if you have a better sense in the fall or late, more into the winter, what's happening, then you can either reapply or make a decision with those employees jointly that maybe they don't want to be extended, in fact, are happy to be terminated at that point. And again, that will likely be informed by whatever programming is offered by the federal government, by the provincial government in relation to supports for employees and employers going forward.
So does anyone have any other questions? I don't see any more in the chat right now. No? Oh. If you have less than 50% support from a department, can you apply for the others?
Yes, you can. So it's really up to you as the employer and your workforce to decide how you want to package this up. So if you have, say, one property that everyone wants to be extended, one property that they don't, you could make a site-specific variance. Or if you had one group of staff, housekeeping, for example, that really supported it, but maybe the front counter staff didn't, you could just apply for those particular individuals. So that's a way in which you can kind of make sure that you're minimizing the number of employees that aren't going to be extended. If they clearly want to be extended and you want to extend them, then we'll try and figure out a way. So it would be a question of just packaging that application in that way. If you have less than 50 support, yeah, okay, that we've got that one. If someone is off sick, do they still count in the variance? Yes. So it depends on, again, this is a bit of a loaded question, but the answer is the Act requires that the majority of employees support it, and so impacted employees. So if that person typically would be considered as someone you would consider an employee for the purposes of any other purpose, I would consider them in that group of employees that are going to be impacted, because they could come back to work, and so on their recall they would be disentitled to pursuing that compensation for length of service. So that you would probably count them in.
So recognizing that CEWS is a federal program, there is one here that says if you have any insight if CEWS will be extended into the new year.
So I will have no insight on that. I'm sorry. Denise might.
No, I'm afraid at this point we don't. But certainly, you know, we're building processes here to support British Columbians as much as possible. And if there's something that we'll need to respond to that's provided federally that will help British Columbians, then of course, I'm sure there'll be work done around that. But at this point, no insight. Sorry.
All right. Well, I don't see any more questions in the chat. So I'm going to thank everyone for coming. And I hope you found the information informative. We will be sending the webinar recording out with the PowerPoint slides. So if anybody has any questions, the links are on the PowerPoint, so you can look at it directly from there. And all the 1-800 number information is there also. Thank you very much to the team from the Ministry of Labor and Employment Standards Branch for providing this information today.
Thank you, Terry.
Our pleasure.
Thank you for having us.
Have a great day. Bye now.